Problem solved.
Yeah.
Okay.
All the virtual thing, yeah. Okay, thank you
Yeah.
everyone for having that patience, and and we are back here. So here, thank you, Veena, first of all, for accepting the invite and being part of the session. We are pleased to welcome you here on the session. So before I hand over the stage to you, I just want to give a glimpse of all your achievement to the audience, whoever is present here, so that they are aware on what is that achievement that you carry. So Veena has over 18 years of experience across the domains ranging from sales, operations, customer service to people development in FMCG, banking, and IT sectors. She leads people development for VMware India and R&D China since Jan 18, where she is responsible from end-to-end talent development across the organization. Veena is also certified wrong thinker and practitioner in Hogan, DISC, FIROB, EQI 2.0 and organization development. She is currently pursuing her interest in transaction analysis. Working and living in Australia for a while has given her the dual benefit of understanding the business side in an organization while also appreciating another culture. She loves being around people and firmly believes that the right people are really the competitive advantage of any organization in today's world. She enjoys learning and working alongside people, be it through workshop, coaching, mentorship, or conversations to support the development of individuals, teams, and organizations. So this was about Veena. Over to you, Veena.
Thanks, Jaya. That was a flattering introduction, and I truly feel privileged and honored to be able to present to you today. And I'm going to talk to you about the power of being able to say no, which is particularly pertinent in our current world where our personal and work life boundaries have sort of blurred, and very, very important for us to be able to keep our sanity intact. Just before I continue, I want to make sure you're able to see my presentation. Jaya?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay. So let me start with a simple reflection exercise for all of you. I'm going to put up 7 sentences on the screen and I'm going to read out each sentence. What I want you to do is write down a yes for yourself if this was true, particularly reflecting on the last 12 to 15 months, and a no if it's not really relevant to you. Yeah. So here's the first statement. You felt you're responding to people's emails all day long. So write down a yes if that was true for you at some point or many points in the last 1.5 years. You felt guilty for taking a break. I have felt guilty many times for taking a break. You've had 15 to 18-hour working days, and with Zoom pervading into our lives, so it could even be called Zoom days. You had family members make demands in the midst of a professional task you had to complete urgently, and then you felt torn between what is it that you need to do first. And you, at some point or at many points, did not know what day of the week it was or what time of the day it was. Yeah, there was a sense of timelessness. One day slipped into the next. You said yes to something you did not want to do. I have been guilty of that multiple times. And then you had to cook, you had to wash, you had to clean, you had to make presentations, you had to deliver on goals and look happy. Now, for many of you, and this is true for me, all or many of these may be a yes. And you may be thinking, oh God, she's going to talk to us about work-life balance. So is this really about work-life balance? No, this is not about work-life balance. This is really about being able to set better boundaries. And maybe this is something that you're hearing for the first time. It may be something you've adapted well to and you set very healthy boundaries in your life. In either case, this will be a reinforcement of something you're already doing very well. And if you have not been great at setting boundaries, this can help you get started and really lead a meaningful and purposeful life. The context for today is going to be about boundaries and remote working, but you will see that as I walk you through the session, all that I'm going to share with you is applicable anywhere after the pandemic is long behind us. It's applicable in your relationships to have healthy relationships as well. So let me start with a simple question about what are boundaries. And you may be wondering, what is she saying, boundaries? So I will use a simple description to say that a boundary is an imaginary line which carves out your space as well as carves out another space if they are also setting boundaries for themselves. It also means that you're able to see the other person on the other side of your boundary. You're able to talk to them. You're able to shake hands with them. And sometimes, on a need basis, you also go over to their side of the boundary, help them out a bit, come back to your side. Sometimes they may come over to your side of the boundary, help you out a bit, and then go back to their side of the boundary. And for some of you, all that I'm saying may feel like, oh God, this really is a non collaborative approach. How can I draw a boundary? I've never done this. It may feel intimidating and overwhelming. But a lot of times, what happens is we begin to see boundaries as barriers. So, boundaries are not barriers. And the difference between a boundary and a barrier is, if a boundary is an imaginary line, a barrier is an imaginary wall. Now, imagine if there was a wall instead of that line. What would happen? You will not be able to see the other person. You definitely can't talk to the other person. You can't go over to their side. Neither can they come over to your side. And simply put, it means that there is absolutely no possibility of communication of any sort. So boundaries are very different from barriers. Why do we then need boundaries? You might think that I've spent 30, 40, 50 years of my life without even thinking about boundaries. Or you may be thinking, yeah, I know why we need boundaries. I see the value of boundaries in my life because I have set healthy boundaries. And this is an opportunity for us to understand or reinforce that. So when we think of boundaries, it's really being able to not feel depleted or worn out at the end of the day, not feel that I'm being taken for granted, not feel that somebody is invading or intruding into my space, and really the permission to say no to a lot of things. And no is a big word for all of us. And I will talk about no in a little bit. But what these boundaries really do is help us step into self-compassion and self-care. So it also means that when you're starting to build boundaries and your boundaries are healthy, you're able to become more compassionate. You're able to be more assertive, ask for what you want. You're able to attend to your needs and not just the needs of those people around you. There's less anger and resentment inside of you. So there is a sense of peace and calm, and there is psychological safety, whether it's with family members or with colleagues or people that you live with. Yeah. So what it does for us by setting healthy boundaries is it gives us the time and energy to be able to do the things that nourish us and give joy to our mind, body, and soul. Now, obviously, when we talk about the purpose of boundaries, we will next talk about what are the types of boundaries that we can have. And when you research on the net, there's a whole lot of material out there on boundaries, how to set healthy boundaries, and how do you look at boundaries. And you can look at it from very different lenses. And I am going to present a couple of frameworks here. Feel free to make it your own. And like I said, while the context for today is a lot about remote working, what I'm going to share with you now is something you can go back and apply in any space in your life, your personal life, your professional life, life after the pandemic as well. So boundaries can be related to task, they can be related to time, they can be related to territory, they can be related to tools or technology. Let me give you an example of a task-related boundary. For example, at home, you may negotiate with your partner or spouse to say, I will prep for breakfast, but you will make the breakfast, or vice versa. So that's a task boundary where you're agreeing to some part of the task and you're saying somebody else will need to do the next part of the task. Likewise, at work, you might say to a colleague, I'm happy to do the draft of this PowerPoint presentation. I'll send it over to you, but I want you to refine it, modify it, fine tune it, make it look beautiful for us to be able to present next week. So that's a task boundary, and that's a simple example. And you can think of different ways in which you can create boundaries around tasks that you do, both household, personal, as well as professional. Now, there's time boundary, right? And this is a very, very critical boundary and very hard to keep. So, a time boundary could be something as simple as to say 10 a.m. to 12 noon every weekday, I'm going to be sitting at my desk doing work related to my profession. Or you might say 5:30 to 7:30 every evening, I'm going to take a break from my professional work. I will not answer emails. I will not look at the pings. I will not look at the messages or the WhatsApp, and really spend time on whatever I want to do. It could be spending time with my family. It could be a personal project that I want to do. It could be taking a short walk or an exercise. But that's a time boundary. You're setting a boundary for yourself as well as for the others around you. Then there is boundary around territory, and this may sound a little oppressive or a little negative even, but this is very important, particularly when we are talking about a physical territory, given that personal and work lives have again become very, very murky. Very important to draw out physical spaces which clearly demarcate which is your workspace, which is your personal space, and where does the rest of the family live in. Yeah. And then tools and technology, right? In the last 15 months, technology has really invaded our lives, I would say. But technology has always meant to be an enabler. But a lot of us have made it our master, and we are succumbed to all the demands of technology. So we'll talk about how do we set boundaries around tools and technology. They are needed, but with boundaries. Yeah. Likewise, you can set boundaries in your relationships as well. And boundaries could be emotional or psychological. So it could be as simple as saying that I will not share what's going on in my personal life, in my professional space. And that's a boundary that you create. I might say, you know what, I'm happy to share if there's something troubling me because it does affect my work life. So it's important for us to remember that boundary is not a one size fits all. It really is about customizing it and making it your own. And physical boundary, like I talked about a territory. So there can be physical boundaries at home that you can create, maybe for me time, for the work that you're going to do in your professional world as well. And there can be boundaries around energy. Where are you going to invest your energy and where will you not put your energy? Yeah. And finally, material boundaries. And this may sound a little mundane as well. And a simple example of a material boundary is, I use makeup and I will not share it with anyone else at home, whether it's my daughter or sister and anybody else in the family. That makeup products that I buy is only mine. So that is a material boundary as an example. Yeah. Take the time to reflect on this if you're hearing this for the first time and see how you can use the task, time, territory, and tools as boundaries to lead a more healthy and meaningful life, or set boundaries around emotional, physical, energy, and material to be able to have more healthy relationships. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit more around how do I set boundaries, particularly when working remotely. And a lot of us continue to work remotely, and perhaps even when the pandemic is behind us, many of us will continue to work remotely. And for me, working remote is a first time experience. I've always thrived on going to work, connecting with colleagues. I feel the need to talk to people, have those coffee conversations, chat sometimes, go on lunch together. And I miss all that because I'm working remote and I've struggled through this. I have learned some things along the way, and I'm sure everyone listening in has done that as well. It is work in progress. It's not a destination, it's a journey for me. For us to understand that setting boundaries is a skill to learn, it's a muscle to build. Important, don't give up. If you fall down, pick yourself up and continue to reaffirm your boundaries. So, with that, I'll talk a little bit about how do I set healthy boundaries when I'm working remotely. The first one, and maybe in the last 1.5 years, many of you have already done this. So this is something that I'm sharing. And for others who are listening in, if there are best practices that you have that's different from what I'm going to share, please share it in the chat so everyone else can learn from your experience as well. So the first thing I would say is to set clear boundaries with your boss and colleagues. And there are times initially, when the pandemic hit us, I used to get frustrated that I would get pings and calls and meetings at all times of the day and night. And I used to feel angry and frustrated sometimes with my team members and sometimes even with my boss. But then I realized that they didn't know what was going on with me, and because I had not said anything to them. Mine was a boundaryless world. And that's very important for us, particularly if you're working across. And even if you have team members and your boss sitting in the same time zone. So tell people when you're available to work and when you're not available, because this is no longer a 9 to 5 world for any of us, right? So at some point in the day, you're devoted to your professional work, and there's definitely that household work that comes in, especially true for women. I know the men have been taking on a lot of the house, but it's not an equal world still. And then there is time when you need to do something personal, right? There's a project that you want to complete, you want to spend time with your family. So it's all integrated into one. So it's very important to call out and say, when are you available to work? And for many of us, we may need flexi time now more than ever, especially if you have children where you need to spend time to teach them and invest in their learning as well. So ask for flexi time. Tell people when you're available to respond to emails, join meetings, respond to chats, etc. And also tell when you're not available. So turn that notification off, log off that collaboration tool to let your people know that you're not available at this time. It's not that your boss or colleagues enjoy invading your private space, right? So unless you tell them what is your boundary, they will continue to invade. And it will lead to anger and resentment. Now, this is a very important one. Having a designated workspace that you can enter and leave. Now, prior to the pandemic, a lot of us were used to going to an office, which was a physical building, and knew that once I enter that building, until the time that I actually leave the building, I'm actually going to be doing only work that's related to my profession. Whether it was meetings, it was conversations, or anything else, projects, deliverables, it was only work in that physical space. Now, with that physical boundary gone, everything has become murky, right? So, what is work look like today? Wake up in the morning, freshen up, and you walk a few steps into the next room or adjacent area, and you're in your workspace. The challenge is a lot of us have not been able to create a designated workspace. Some of us may have the comfort of having a separate room. If you have that comfort, please use it if you're not already doing it. Close the door to say to yourself and to your family members that I am at work doing things that affect my profession. And that's very important. Now, let's say you don't have the luxury of a separate room. It should not stop you from having a designated workspace, even if you're sharing that workspace with a family member or with a teammate. Get creative about it. It could be just a chair and a table that you have as a workspace. Don't do anything else in that space, and don't do your professional work anywhere else in the house. So make it sacrosanct. In that way, you're telling yourself that this is my work area. So I get into that work mode when I'm sitting here. And when I'm not in this area, I'm not doing work. So it's also a signal to your family. Use a temporary curtain to say that this is my workspace. Use a tape, use paper, use rope, anything that can tell you physically that this is my workspace, and get creative with it. It could be a particular dress that you wear to tell your family that, look, this is when I'm going to be in my professional space, if you don't have demarcated physical spaces at home. Equally important is for you to have a ritual to start and end that work day. Now, if you reflect back on prior to the pandemic, when you entered the office, I'm sure you always started with a hi, hello to your colleagues. And maybe more often than not, you walked up to get yourself that morning cup of coffee, or you went up to chat with your colleagues before you turned on your laptop. It's important to have a ritual even now. And a ritual could be as simple as just turning on your laptop for the first time in the day. It could be carrying that water bottle to where your workspace is that you've created. It could be bringing in that morning cup of coffee for you to start the day. It could be anything. But follow that ritual every weekday that you are going to sit in that professional workspace. Likewise, create a ritual that indicates you're leaving the workspace. So if it's a curtain, if it's a rope, if it's a tape that you have to demarcate the area, close it to announce that, yes, I'm done for the day. Yeah. And it could be something as simple as, maybe you were exercising once you were done for the day. So once you get up and leave, do that exercise. So there is a ritual you're building even to close the day from a workspace standpoint. Very important. Some of it may sound trivial, but when you actually start implementing it, you will see a lot of benefits in how you respond to those boundaries, as well as how your family members and the people respond to those boundaries. Now, a lot of us, and I've experienced this, might have felt guilty that during the so-called working office hours, you're having to do household work or personal work simply because all that is blurred now. And I've been guilty of it. So there is this tendency to overcompensate by always trying to do work. And I'm sure you will agree that your what was a typical 9-hour work day has become a 12 or maybe even a 15-hour work day. Now, very important not to lose that me time, not to lose those personal activities that you really enjoy doing. So the easiest way to do it is to schedule it on your calendar. And it may sound a little silly if you're not doing it, but it really helps, because if you don't have it on your calendar now, it's very easy to slip into doing work, because all of us know that work expands to fill the time. There is no end to doing work. Yeah. And continuing with that is make your break time sacrosanct. And I've been a big violator of my break time. So when the pandemic hit us, I got this grand plan and put 45-minute lunch breaks on my calendar saying, oh, I'm really great at this. But what I did in the process was two things. Sometimes there would be colleagues who would set up a meeting exactly at the time when I said, I'm going to have a lunch break. And I would feel very obliged and accept that calendar invite, attend that meeting. So what happened to lunch in the process? I would either gobble it before the meeting or postpone it until after the meeting. So my eating habits went erratic. Or sometimes if I did have lunch, I would finish lunch in 10 minutes. And in the 11th minute, I'm right back at my desk. So that need to be always visible, to be seen, to be able to contribute simply because I'm feeling guilty that I'm taking a break. But remember, your break time is sacred. Don't compromise it. Just as it is important for you to be able to deliver on your goals and commitments, whether it's to your family or to your profession, your break time is equally important. And don't compromise on your break time. If it's a 1-hour lunch break, don't come back to your work till that 1 hour is up. Even if it means you finish lunch in 30 minutes, take a stroll, relax, sit down, reflect on how your day has gone. So there's so much you can do in your break, but don't leave it. Don't compromise on your break time. Now, for a lot of us prior to the pandemic, we used to have the so-called commute time, right? For some of us, it may have been a 30-minute drive to work. And some of us who were less fortunate, it was a 2-hour drive. Yeah. And when the pandemic hit us, we were very happy that we no longer have to go through that grind of the maddening traffic or the pollution to be able to get to work. But what we may have forgotten in the process was that this commute time actually created a boundary between our personal and professional lives. And now that boundary is gone. So, what some of us may have started doing is if I was leaving home at 8 o'clock to be able to get to work at 10 o'clock, say, because I lived far away from my workplace, now in the last 1.5 years, it's possible that I have started logging in at 8 o'clock and started doing work. If that's what you've been doing, stop, take a step back, use your commute time to be doing something that you always wish you could but never got around to doing it. It could be exercising, it could be reading a book, it could be listening to music, it could be pursuing a hobby, it could be meditation, anything that you wanted to do but never found the time to do it. You have the time now. It's come to you on a platter, so use it. Don't start work in your commute time. Now, this is, I feel, the most difficult one. When you're done, stay done. What that really means is you have to shut down at some point every day, and being available all the time is not a healthy way to work. There are ways in which you can stay done, right? It could be as simple as shutting your laptop, putting it away in the drawer so you don't have the temptation to check that one last email, to respond to that one last message as well. It's also important to stay in control of technology here. And when I say technology, it's not just your laptop, right? There are other devices that invade our lives. Like I said at the beginning, we've made them our masters. So there is a temptation to check emails on my phone because I've now shut down my laptop. There is a temptation to respond to some message that a colleague has sent simply because I can now check it on my phone, even though my laptop is off. And one of the things that I have done, which has worked really well for me, is when I used to take breaks in the last 1.5 years when I've been at home, I used to be away from the laptop, but I would have my phone with me. And it was easy to get carried away into the phone, right? So I would start checking emails, start checking WhatsApp, start checking SMS, everything. And my break time just got washed down. But what I did about 3 months ago was I deleted my work mail from my phone and I deleted my personal mail from my phone. What has happened as a process is if I have to check emails, I have to come to my laptop. And so at the end of when I log off my laptop and power it down, I do not know what's happening in my work world until I turn it on a Monday morning. And that's helped me so much in my personal life to be able to bring back so much into my family time. And that may not work for you. It may be something different, which is absolutely okay. But remember to detox from the digital world as well. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I was reading an article, and a CEO of an organization said that he and his wife had created a mobile jail at home. And what they did was every day evening from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., they used to put away their mobile phones in that jail. So in that 4 hours, neither of them could take calls, respond to messages, check emails or anything. And in a way that sort of enabled them to spend more quality time with each other and their family. So very important to shut down finally and say, yes, I'm done for the day. Equally important to signal this to your family members as well. Now, if you don't do any of this, and if you're not already doing any of this, it's very likely that you're facing burnout, and burnout can take many shapes and forms, and I'll talk about that in a bit. And one of the things to also set is setting boundaries with your family. And you may say, no, that feels a little negative. How can I set boundaries with my family? How can I say no to them, you'll be surprised at how people will start respecting your boundaries, including children, when you start setting boundaries and saying no to some of the things. I'll again give you an example of mine. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and obviously last year, when her classes went online, it was a huge struggle, not just for her, but for me also, because it was challenging for me to work from home as well as help her manage to an online world. And she used to constantly come and bother me saying, I'm feeling bored. I don't know what to do now. You tell me what to do. Stop doing work. Constantly invading my space. Because obviously she did not have friends she could go out and play with. There was school that she used to go to and she could no longer go there. Now, I tried encouraging her to create a schedule for herself. When I say schedule, it's not just a to-do list or not just her school activities, but a schedule for the day, which included how she got ready, when she got ready, what would she do when she was not attending classes, including a schedule for weekends. Now, initially, she was very thrilled with the idea of making the schedule itself, and she would spend hours making the schedule. But the reality was she never got around to executing it. So I still struggled, but I kept at it. And now what has happened, and I got creative with it as well. So I got her a fancy book with stickers and colors and said, why don't you try doing a schedule in this? But in the last 3 months, that's become a habit for her. Every night, without fail, before going to bed, doesn't matter what time it is in the night, how tired she is, she will always not sleep without writing her schedule. And her schedule includes stuff like what she's going to do after her online classes, when is her playtime, including things that she will do during weekends. And what has happened in the process is we as a family have also learned to respect her boundaries, although she's a child. So very important for you to set boundaries, not just for yourself, with your family also, especially if you have children, because it also means you're role modeling the right behaviors with them. You're telling them that it's okay to have boundaries. You're telling them that it's healthy to have boundaries. Yeah. And like I said earlier, if you are not doing any of this, I'm sure you are facing burnout. And like I said, burnout can take so many different forms and shapes. It can start with feeling physically exhausted. It can be disengagement with anything you're doing, either work related stuff or something even with your family. You may start to feel disillusioned. You may be afraid of your future. And it can also lead to physical ailments. So that's another big reason why boundaries are very important. Yeah. Now, having heard all this, it also means that when we are setting boundaries, we are saying yes to some things and we are saying no to the others. And particularly from a cultural standpoint, and I can say this of myself, as a woman and as a girl being brought up, I was told to pay attention to the needs and feelings of others, not to pay attention to my own. It was important to subdue my needs and feelings, so I was not selfish. Particularly as a mother, I should be always available to my daughter. These are some of the things that I have learned in the culture and environment that I have been brought up. But it's not been healthy for me and it doesn't work. I cannot be always available, even if it's my daughter. I need some boundaries there. And so important for us to know that no is a complete sentence. It is a right that each one of us have. It's not a privilege. So you have the right to say no to anyone, your children, your spouse, your partner, family members, your colleagues, and even your boss. Now, saying no doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be unkind. And there are different ways in which you can say no. I'll share a few examples, and I'm sure all of you here will have different ways to say no. So if there is, say, an ask from a colleague on a sudden task that needs to be completed or to be done by you, You don't have to feel the impulse to say yes. You can just push back and say, can I get back to you on this? I need to check my schedule. You can check your schedule, and if your bandwidth doesn't permit, feel comfortable to say, I'm sorry, my bandwidth doesn't permit, I can't do this. Or if it permits you later to say, I can do this, but I can do it a week later, or I can do it a fortnight later. So that's one way of saying no. Another way of saying, and this can be particularly important if it's your manager who's trying to give you something additional to do, and if there's already project A that you're working on, it's important to tell your manager that if I say yes to this project B, then line item Y on A is going to get delayed. Or if you want me to do project B as well, I will only be able to do line item A and line item B. And you'll be surprised at how well your manager will accept it. A lot of times it could be fear that prevents us from asking for what we need, but give it a try, build that courage, and you will surprise yourself with the number of people who will respect your boundaries. And sometimes it might just be a no. Thank the person for considering you and just say, I'm not able to do this now. And sometimes it may be a matter of time, right? A colleague pinging you in the night, just as you're about to wind up for the day, to say, you know what, can you do this task for me? It's urgent. To push back and say, I'm sorry, this is the end of my day. I'm happy to talk about this, but can we talk about this tomorrow or maybe next week? Whatever is your context, yeah? And equally importantly, see if this can be delegated. Is there somebody else on the team who can help? Is there somebody else in some other team who can do this work? And when you're saying no, it's not just to your colleagues. I'm also saying about putting a no to your family members. Now, it's possible that your young child might insist that you maybe play with her now. So you can say a simple thing like, if I have to play with you now for the next 30 minutes, it means that lunch will get delayed, or it means that snack will get delayed, or it means that I will only be able to play with you for 30 minutes in the evening as against the 1 hour that we had discussed. So you can negotiate with your child, you can negotiate with your partner. If your spouse or family says, let's watch this movie now, you can again say a no and say, you know what, I want all of us to watch this together. Can we watch this on Saturday? I need to get some work done, or I need to do something else that I have to complete. So there are different ways in saying no, but it's a skill to build. It's a muscle. And unless you practice it repeatedly, you will not be able to learn it. And there will be times when you will fall, you will not hold on to your boundaries. It's absolutely okay. The only thing to remember is to pick yourself back up. Now, equally importantly, just because I've set boundaries, it doesn't mean people will always honor them. Yeah, there will be times when somebody is going to violate the boundary that I set. And perhaps it'll happen sooner than later. Important for us to understand that there is a cultural context that could be very different, ours versus theirs. Their needs could be different, what you need versus what the other person needs. And this is true even of family members. Yeah, particularly children struggle to keep boundaries. And as parents, it's important to be calm but be firm and repeatedly reinforce those boundaries. So the first thing to do when somebody breaks or violates the boundary is to reassert your boundary. So like I gave you an example, if there is a colleague who set up a meeting during lunch, to politely decline the meeting and say, it's my lunch break, I cannot join the meeting. Can you postpone it? If there are others in the meeting, can you record the meeting? I will listen into it later, or share the minutes of the meeting so I'm aware of what was discussed. Very important to be calm, but be firm. Don't give up on your boundaries very easily. And a simple example could be when somebody is asking you to take on extra work. It could be a household task. It could be a professional task. Just to gently push back and say, no, I can't do this now. Or no, this is not what I had agreed to do. Yeah. Very important to use I language. So to say, I feel frustrated when asked to do X task, rather than saying, you make me angry when you ask me to do X task. Yeah, don't make it about the other person. Take ownership for your boundaries and your feelings. Yeah. And if this is a conversation that's happening in person where someone's violated your boundary, and this is in the current scenario likely to be only with family members because we are not meeting with colleagues in person, physically take a step back, and that can help a lot to clear your head and negotiate why that boundary was broken and reinforce your boundary. Yeah. Also an opportunity to reflect and see how have you set the boundaries. Are they healthy? Are they very loose, very porous, or very rigid that people are not honoring the boundaries? Yeah, constantly reassess your boundaries. It's not an action to be taken at one point in time. It's something that you constantly work on, and boundaries can shift. Yeah. And most importantly, set consequences for overstepped boundaries. Yeah, whether it's with children, whether it's with family members, even with colleagues. And consequences can be very, very simple, yeah, and easy. And the word consequence may feel very overwhelming, but it's just to say that if your boundary is overstepped, this is what is going to happen, and this is what is not going to happen. Yeah. But the first and easiest thing to do is to start setting boundaries if you've not been doing it already. And there's loads that I've shared with you, and I'm sure there's a lot that's coming up in the chat as well. And maybe there's already lots of boundaries that you've set in your life to go back and reflect on how well they're working for you as well. Now, at the end of it, it's very important for us to be empathetic towards ourselves and realize that it's not easy to set boundaries, particularly if we've not been great at them, if we've not had healthy boundaries in our life, in relationships, to understand that it's not easy. However, to also remember that being assertive about what you need is not about being unkind. And this is something that I love. Every time you say no to the others, you're saying yes to yourself. And that's a huge step towards self compassion. So every time you've tempted and you have that impulse to say yes, remember this sentence, that every time you say no to others, you're saying yes to yourself. And that's a huge step towards self compassion. So it means that when you say yes, you're making that yes out of a choice and it's not compulsion. So there's no resentment or anger. And like somebody said, givers need to set the limits because takers rarely do. So if you're the person who's constantly giving, put that limit about what you'll give, how you'll give, when you'll give, and where you will give. And this is everybody in your life. Yeah. And finally, respect is a two-way street. So it's very important to appreciate the boundaries that others have set for themselves, including children, just as it is important for setting boundaries for ourselves. Yeah. And to be able to say no, hence, to many things and say yes to ourselves, which means that you can be a good person with a kind heart and still say no, keeping your sanity intact and being able to enjoy the things that you love to do and lead a meaningful and purposeful life. Thank you.
Thank you, Veena, for such a wonderful session. I have no words to express how beautifully you explained it, everything. We were able to relate it to our personal life on a daily activity, especially during this virtual environment. It was marvelous. And we are glad that you are part of the session and we, were able to listen to you. And I also see that you have covered like all of the topics where you have helped us understand what is the power of no. Though it's a small word, it carries a lot of power. And what are the good strategies, what are the purpose of having boundaries, and the types of boundaries, and how to say no. That's also a privilege that we got to know from your session. I had a couple of questions, but I don't think I'll be able to ask them because those are already answered here right away. So, and
Sure,
I was
sure.
actually going through on the chat as well. We don't see any of the questions coming up, but in fact people are really impressed on the session that you just gave. So thank you so much for being here and having you here. It was a great thing. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely, Jaya. Thanks. It was a pleasure being here and glad that you had me here and I got the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining. And I hope you all liked it. Yeah. Thank you all. Bye bye.